Welcome to the Explainer. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here today because, wow, we are about to unpack what has to be one of the most fascinating dynamics playing out in the tech world right now. Look, if you follow the artificial intelligence space, you already know it's moving at absolute breakneck speed. But here's the thing. What's truly defining the AI landscape at this exact moment? It isn't actually just the models themselves. It's a massive two-front war. On one front, we've got these intense, bombshell-dropping governance battles playing out right in the courtroom. And on the other, we are witnessing a staggering, honestly mind-bending economic build-out that literally has the potential to reshape global markets. Today, we're going to break down the exact mechanics of both of these fronts. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with those courtroom bombshells and the Sutskever dossier before doing a hard pivot over to Anthropic's $200 billion deal, vertical extraction, the trillion-dollar backlog, and finally, we'll ask the big question, are we in the middle of the next railroad bubble? All right, part one, bombshells in the courtroom. Okay, let's dive right into this first front, the Musk versus OpenAI trial. During the second week of this trial, 3 independent witnesses actually took the stand and echoed the exact same, very serious concerns about OpenAI's leadership. First up was Rosie Campbell. She's a former safety researcher there. Now, when she joined the company back in 2021, she said the focus was heavily on research and long-term safety, things like making sure AI aligns with human values. But flash forward to 2024, and she walked away. Her AGI readiness team, along with the superalignment team, was just entirely dismantled. On the stand, she testified that the culture had shifted so drastically she literally felt she had no home left there. It's a pretty powerful statement about an internal shift away from safety, right? And then we heard from David Scheiser. He's a former dean of Columbia Law School and a total expert in nonprofit law. Well, he revealed a stunning structural failure during his testimony. He stated that Microsoft was actually allowed to test a version of GPT-4 without ever going through OpenAI's internal safety review process. I mean, think about that. For a nonprofit that is explicitly designed to safely guide AI, having a CEO withhold that level of critical operational and safety info from the board, that fundamentally breaks the partnership required to uphold their whole mission. Moving on to part 2, the Sutskever dossier. Which brings us to a revelation that completely shatters the public narrative we've all heard. This comes courtesy of former OpenAI board member Tashi McCauley. She testified to what she flat out described as a culture of deceit under CEO Sam Altman. But the real smoking gun here? An email she received from co-founder Ilya Sutskever. People are already calling this the Sutskever dossier. We're not talking about a brief offhand complaint here. This was dozens of pages, meticulously documenting chaotic events and alleged lies. McCauley testified that the board just lacked the fundamental transparency they needed to oversee the for-profit arm. Amazingly, the board wasn't even informed before the massive public launch of ChatGPT. No prior heads up at all. So the crucial point we really need to take away is this. You have a safety researcher, a nonprofit law expert, and a former board member, all pointing to the exact same pattern of behavior. This completely rewrites the history we thought we knew. Remember back in November 2023 when the board briefly fired Sam Altman? The whole world basically dismissed it as this sudden failed palace coup. But this testimony, it reveals something entirely different. It shows a governance body that had been meticulously building a documented case backed by a co-founder's multi-page dossier over a period of several months. It wasn't random at all. It was a calculated governance action based on documented evidence.
All right, part 3, Anthropic's $200 billion.
We are going to pivot cleanly now, right out of the courtroom and straight into the server room. Because this is the second front of the AI war. $200 billion. Let that sink in. That isn't a market cap, folks, and it's certainly not a government infrastructure bill. That is a single, staggering financial commitment reported between Anthropic and Google Cloud, which is set to play out over a 5-year period starting in 2027. To really put the sheer gravity of that number into perspective for you, this single commitment means that Anthropic, just one AI startup, now accounts for over 40% of Google Cloud's entire total revenue backlog. Over 40%? Anthropic has fundamentally fused its future with Google's infrastructure. This is no longer just a standard vendor relationship, it's a profound strategic alignment that is literally driving the bottom line of one of the largest tech companies on the planet. Let's unpack this in part 4, Vertical Extraction Explained. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would Google agree to a structure where their cloud revenue is so deeply dependent on one single startup? Well, it's actually a brilliant strategy that analysts are calling vertical extraction. Here is exactly how this perfect circular economy works. Step 1. Google invests up to $40 billion into Anthropic. Step 2. Anthropic turns right around and commits $200 billion straight back to Google Cloud to rent servers and compute power. And the absolute magic here is entirely in the extraction. See, Google's initial investment basically pays for Google's own chips, which run the models, which generate the revenue that ultimately funds the initial investment. By owning the hardware, the cloud, and the equity, Google wins at every single layer of the stack. And let me tell you, the market is rewarding this circular genius heavily. Driven by a massive 63% growth rate in Google Cloud, Alphabet's market cap has surged to an astounding $4.67 trillion. That puts them right on the heels of NVIDIA. Think about what's happening here. Google isn't just competing in the AI software space anymore. They are vertically integrating the entire compute spend of their biggest partners to directly rival the ultimate chipmaker on the planet. It's wild. Moving on to part 5, the trillion-dollar backlog. If we zoom out a bit and look beyond just Google, looking across Amazon and Microsoft too, we see a macroeconomic picture that is absolutely unprecedented. Get this, out of a $2 trillion cloud revenue backlog spanning the major providers, over half of it is driven by just 2 startups, OpenAI and Anthropic. Take a second to really think about that. Over $1 trillion in committed cloud spending relies entirely on 2 companies that literally did not even exist 7 years ago. They're single-handedly inflating the revenue backlogs of the world's largest tech giants. But here's where we hit a massive and honestly somewhat terrifying math problem. Anthropic currently has an impressive revenue run rate of about $30 billion, which is great. But remember, to comfortably pay Google that $200 billion over 5 years, starting in 2027, they need to scale their business to well over $100 billion annually. And they need to do it fast. So what happens if AI revenue growth decelerates before these commitments are fulfilled? What if they only hit $40 or $50 billion a year? If that happens, this entire beautifully designed circular structure could crack under some incredible stress. Finally, part 6, the next railroad bubble. And this brilliantly illustrates why financial historians are paying incredibly close attention right now. Because believe it or not, we've actually seen this exact economic structure before. Back during the 1860s railroad boom, massive amounts of debt funded westward expansion, and it was built entirely on the assumption that commerce would just instantly follow the tracks. But demand was delayed. The infrastructure was ready way before the customers were, and that triggered a spectacular financial bubble and crash. Now, eventually the bonds did pay off once the traffic finally caught up, but that timing mismatch caused massive short-term destruction. And guess what? Today's AI infrastructure economy is operating on those exact same assumptions. Look, make no mistake, the build-out is completely real. We are putting real physical chips into real data centers, and the demand for AI is undeniably real too. The trap here lies entirely in the timing. Will the adoption timelines of enterprise and consumer AI perfectly match up with these astronomical $200 billion commitments starting in 2027? Because if that traffic catches up just a few years too late, the shockwaves ripping through the cloud giants are going to be massive. Which leaves us all with this final, absolutely vital question to chew on. With these massive circular cloud commitments driving the entire market, are we steadily building the bedrock of the future economy? Or are we just funding the next great railroad bubble? The courtroom drama we talked about earlier, that's going to decide who ultimately controls these models. But this trillion-dollar math problem, that is going to decide if the ecosystem itself actually survives. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes fixed on both fronts of this war, and I'll see you next time.